There's a article and a conversation in the Less Wrong community about regarding catastrophic risk, mistake theory versus conflict theory. What percentage of the issues come from like known stuff that we knew would cause a problem, or at least could cause a problem, and game theoretically we went ahead with it anyways, versus stuff where we just couldn't have anticipated or really didn't anticipate. And I think it's fair to say these are both issues, right? There's true mistake theory stuff, like we just couldn't calculate. And then there's true conflict theory stuff. We knew that escalating this military capacity would drive an arms race where the other people would, that if we calculated it, there's an exponentiation on all arms races that takes us to a very bad long-term global situation. One of the insights that I think is really interesting is that the fact that the mistake theory is a thing and everyone acknowledges it ends up being a cover, a source of plausible deniability for what's really conflict theory. So we know there is an issue. We pretend not to know. We do a bullshit job of due diligence and risk analysis, and then afterwards say it was a failure of imagination and we couldn't have possibly known. I have actually been asked by companies and organizations to do risk analyses for them where they did not want me to actually show them the real risk. They wanted me to check a box so they could say they did risk analysis so they could pursue the opportunity. And when I started to show them the real risk, they're like, fuck, we don't want to know about that. And so when it comes to the could we have possibly factored that? So, I mean, a classic example I like to give because it's so obvious in retrospect is, could we have known in the development of the internal combustion engine that making streetcars, which seemed like a very useful upgrade of having the horse internalized to the carriage, would end up causing climate change and the petrodollar and wars over oil and oil spills en masse and ocean oil spills, whatever. It seems like that would have been hard to know 100 years in the future that it would do all that stuff. And this is a classic example of also where we solve a problem and end up causing a worse problem down the road in the nature of how we do it, which you can't keep doing forever. The story is, oh, we cause a worse problem, then that's the new market opportunity to solve that problem in the ongoing story of human innovation. But when you start running up against it, the problems are actually hitting catastrophic points. You don't get to keep doing that ongoingly. You don't get to regulate after the fact the way that we always have once a problem hits the world, things that are catastrophic. Could we have known? Well, yeah, in London before that, one, there were already electric motors, and two, people were already getting sick of burning coal from lung disease from the burning of the hydrocarbons. If we had tried to do good risk analysis, could we have? Yeah. But there's so much more incentive on who pursues the opportunity first. And then there's this multipolar trap of, well, let's say we don't, the other guy's going to, so it's going to get there anyways. So we might as well be the ones to do it first. And that thing ends up getting us all the time, which is why collective action again comes in.
Well, it's really interesting how much of this is, again, parallel. Heather and I used the example of somebody, driving the first internal combustion engine and somebody chasing them down the street saying, don't do that, you'll screw up the atmosphere, right? How crazy is that person running down the street saying that? Because, you would have to scale it up to such a degree before that's even a concern that person seems like a nervous Nelly. But of course, they would also have been prophetic. But the other thing I want to ask you about is, you say that we have these two categories where sometimes we could have known and we knew, in fact, and we went ahead anyway. And then in other cases, we didn't know and something snuck up on us. And I want to clarify what you just said, because my understanding here is that if you dig deep enough, somebody always knew. Right? In general, there's some mechanism whereby the person who correctly predicted what was going to happen has been silenced. Often they lose their jobs. They disappear from polite society. At the point they turn out to be right, their reputations are never resurrected, as far as I can tell. So am I wrong that even in the cases where people who made the decisions may plausibly have not known, that the reason they didn't know is because there's some sort of active process that, when there's a profit to be made, shuts down anything that could be the basis of a logical argument that we shouldn't do it?
I don't know that I'll say always. I'll certainly say most of the time. Um, and let's say there was a case where we like really nobody knew. It's usually my guess is we probably could have had we tried harder. And then let's say there's going to be some unpredictable stuff. Like we know in complex situations, there's going to be unpredictable stuff. So you do the best job you can to forecast the risks and harms ahead of time. But then you also have to be ongoingly monitoring, well, what would the early indicators that there's a problem be? And how do we take it when we find that there's something we hadn't anticipated? How do we factor that into a change of design? Well, once the profit stream is going and the change of design fucks up the profit stream, how does the recognition of that there's a problem actually get implemented when those who have the choice implementation power are not the people who are paying attention to those indices? So yes, I would say, and it's easy to just say, hey, yeah, there was some wackadoodle who was saying that there was going to be some risk, but there's always some wackadoodle saying there's going to be risk about every new tech. And if we really listened to all of them, we'd have no progress. That's the story, right? It's a bullshit story. Could we? Now there's a collective coordination issue, because it is fair to say, so like, let's take AI weapons right now, specifically automated drone weapons. There is an arms race happening on automated drone weapons. And I think every general and military strategist knows that all of our chance of dying from AI weapons goes up. Their kids, everybody's, as we progress in that technology. It's a bad technology. It shouldn't exist. We should create an international moratorium that says nobody builds AI drone weapons, that we don't want automated weapons with high intelligence out there. But we can't make that moratorium, because if one country doesn't agree, if one non-country, some non-state actor doesn't agree that has the technology, or let's say everybody agrees, how do we know they're not lying and developing it as an underground black project? So either we don't even make the agreement, or we make the agreement knowing we're going to lie, defect in a black project, spy on their black project, and try to lie to their spies who are spying on us. And so it's like, how do you get around that thing where if anyone does the bad thing in the near term, it confers so much game theoretic advantage that anyone who doesn't do it loses in the long term? Why it was that the peaceful cultures all got slaughtered by the warring cultures. And so what ends up making it through is those who end up being effective enough at war. That's an underlying thing we have to shift, because that has as its eventual attractor space self-destruction in a finite space.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think fascinating thing when you interact with the incarnate aspect of the process you just described is that the people who are telling the lies that explain why we're doing something that we know is reckless often don't know that that's what they're doing, right? They actually believe their own press. And instead of saying, well, yes, this is terrible, but we don't really have a choice, or somehow indicating that they know that, what you encounter is a true believer who thinks that this is safe. And that's very frightening, because it means that the mechanism at the point something begins to go awry to do anything about it doesn't exist, right? Or at least it's not connected to the part that you can talk to. And so, again, not too surprised to find overlap in our map. I would say the process that you describe of, by the time you discover what the hazard is, that there's a profit that has accelerated the process. I call this the senescence of civilization, because it's actually exactly a mirror for the process that causes a body to senesce. The evolution of senescence involves processes that have two aspects, one which benefits you when you're young and another which harms you when you're old. And because many individuals don't live long enough to experience the harms in old age, they get away with it from evolution's point of view, and evolution favors the trait in spite of the late life harms. So those late life harms accumulate, and that's the reason that we grow feeble with age and die. And that's an exact mirror for the way we've set up our economic and political system, where any process that is profitable in the short term at the consequence of having some dire implication for civilization later on, those processes are so ingrained by the time we discover what the harm looks like in its full form, there's nothing we can do to stop them.
Okay, so let's use two really important current examples. So let's take Facebook and social media and the way they've affected the information commons and the epistemic commons writ large. So we know that the nature of the algorithms optimizing for time on site while being able to factor what I pay attention to, the whole Tristan Harris story, makes almost very few people wake up and say, I'd like to spend 6 hours on Facebook. And so I'm going to spend more time on Facebook if I kind of leave executive function, rational brain, and get into some kind of limbically hijacked state where I forget that I don't want to spend my whole day on Facebook. And so time on site maximization appeals to existing bias and appeals to limbic hijacks. So if I piss off and scare the whole and elicit sexual desire and whatever of the whole population while doubling down on their bias and creating stronger in-group identities associated with out-group identities, the algorithms optimize. Well, it is an AI of the power that beats Kasparov at chess, beating us at the nature of the control of our attention. So we can see that the right got more right, the left got more left, the conspiracy theories got wackier, the anti-conspiracy theory people became more upset at the idea that a conspiracy could ever exist. Basically, everybody's bias doubles down and they all move apart from each other faster. Well, society doesn't get to keep working. That is a democracy killer, right? That's an open society killer. There's a reason China controlled its internet is if you don't want your society to die, you have to be able to have some shared basis of thought. So we can say, and the story is, oh, we didn't know that was going to happen. Well, you go back and look, and guys like Jaron Lanier were at the very beginning of Facebook and Google, whatever, saying, hey guys, this ad model is going to fuck everything up. Like you can't do the ad model thing. You got to have pay for subscription or, some other kind of thing. And I was like, shut up, dude. Or just don't even engage in the conversation and then get to say afterwards, failure of imagination. But now, how do you regulate it when those corporations are more powerful than countries? Because the regulation is going to be happen in a court where the lobbyists have to be paid for by somebody. Right? So who are the lobbyists paid for by? And it has to be supported by popular attention. And those who can control everybody's attention can also affect what is in popular attention. So this is a very real example where we know the harms were known. And it actually got large enough that it killed the regulatory apparatus's capacity.
Absolutely. In fact, again, this is going to be another alignment of our maps. So what I've been playing with is the idea that we are incorrect in imagining that people necessarily want their expectations flattered, that people actually may like to be challenged, but that it's inconsistent with the well-being of advertisers, that the very fact is, because advertising is only a tiny fraction informative and is mostly manipulative, you have to be in your unconscious autopilot phase in order for it to cause you to buy a car you wouldn't have otherwise bought or buy different deodorant than you would otherwise buy. And so the point is, in order for us to be, the thing gets paid for by advertising. In order to be useful to advertisers, we have to be unconscious. And the only way to keep us unconscious is not to challenge us, basically to tell us what we think we already know rather than what we need to know.